I was leaving a local park in my neighborhood and I noticed a table discarded next to a tree by some garages. I passed by when I went to the park, and as I was leaving, I noticed that it was still there. So I figured, hey, it's probably free, so I'm going to check it out and see if it's salvageable. So after examining it, it looks pretty solid. It's just it has a little bit of water damage and a lot of spots with like some paint on it. It's not a vintage piece, but it is in a mid-century style. Most of the frame of this thing is solid wood, but the top, I'm pretty sure from the style of the water damage, it looks to be pressboard or MDF. So I decided to take this thing home, and I stored it in there for a little while, and I decided that it would be a great time to refinish this table. Lucky for me, this table did fit perfectly in my car, so I didn't have to go and grab my van to pick it up and bring it home, and it was right around the corner from my house anyway, so it was a win-win for me. So I wasn't sure if this thing at least had all the bolts. At least it did look like it had a ton of them, so I'm sure that there is going to be enough to put this thing back together. I just have to figure out what I actually want to do with it. Now that it was in my garage, it was time to give it another once over, and I did notice a lot of stains, a lot of paint, like as if it was used for a craft table, and it had a lot of water damage, a lot of swollen areas. It had paint on the legs. It was a little dinged up and scratched up. For the most part, this thing was nice and solid. I didn't have a good idea of what I really wanted to do with it, so I just decided to jump straight into it. And luckily for me, it was already disassembled halfway by having all the legs taken off of it. So all I had to do was remove the top, but that had about maybe 40 to 50 screws holding this thing down. And it didn't take very long, but it was just a ton of screws. I've never seen a table use so many screws to hold the base to the top. So the next thing that I was thinking was if I was going to replace the top, what was I going to use and how was I going to do it? But after looking at it, I figured that it was going to be just a little bit too much work for me that I didn't really want to put in. Plus the material for the top might be more expensive than I planned on putting into this piece. So I decided to sand it down and try and save it. Starting everything off, I use 150 grit sandpaper, and depending on how smooth that comes in, that is usually where I will stop if I plan on staining. Sometimes I will go up to 220, but then as you know, the higher the grit, the more you close the grain of the wood, so the stain doesn't take as well. So a lot of times I will stop at 150, so long as it doesn't leave a lot of swirl marks. So my original plan was to just sand the legs and the side stretchers all down to bare wood and not really worry too much about any of the rest of the bottom because you won't see it anyway. But now that I started thinking about it a little more and a little more as the project was going on, I decided yes, I am going to strip down all of the sides and the legs to bare wood, but I wanted to paint the top black, which was another thing that I came up with because the white, I'm not really too much into white. So I decided to paint the bottom of the base black. So I'm prepping it here with a 150 grit piece of sandpaper, just giving it a nice scuff sand so that way I can mask off all of the exposed bare wood, just so I can get a couple of coats of black paint, so that way at least if somebody happens to look underneath of it, it is nice and finished and doesn't look unfinished. Now, after I really got into this piece, I started to think like I couldn't really imagine somebody just throwing this thing out. I mean, it is a really nice table, and I did look it up, and they kind of retail for somewhere around $500 to $550. So I couldn't really imagine somebody just tossing it out. But then on the other hand, a lot of people don't really have the time or the means to save stuff like this, and the shop and tools to sand it down and get it to a really nice finish. So I can kind of understand why maybe they just didn't toss it in the trash and kind of set it out on the side of the road. So somebody that wanted to put a little bit of work in it can find it, and I can definitely appreciate that. I'm prepping the bottom as well. I'm sanding it with 150 grit sandpaper. I just want to be able to give this entire piece, top to bottom, a nice uniformed, finished, cohesive look. I don't want to make it seem like steps were skipped on this. So I'm just kind of going all out and trying to make it look as best as it can. Out of all the damage on this piece, this corner was the worst part of the table. It had a lot of swelling. Water must have gotten underneath that laminate layer over the top of it. And of course, MDF swells when it gets water. So I had to do a lot of sanding in that area just to get it nice and flat. And then I did notice too that maybe it had been dropped on its corner when they had put it out, or it could have happened in home, but it did have a big almost chip in the corner that needed some glue. So I got my syringe, filled it up with glue, and I'm going to apply that and use a clamp so that I can let it dry and finish the sanding process. I'm using some wood filler to fill in any of the little tiny pinholes that I found, and also some of the spots that were water damaged that I sanded the laminate off. I wanted to put some in there as well so that I can fill in that MDF because it's nice and porous, and I wanted it to kind of fill it so that way when I go to paint it, it doesn't show through super crazy. I'm using a Carrington stain to stain all of the exposed wood. It gives it a really nice reddish brown color. And one thing you will notice is that this stuff does go on nice and dark as the color that I wanted it to be. But then when you go and you remove all of that stain, this type of wood, not sure what it is, it didn't take the stain as dark as I wanted it. So later on, you'll see how I get the actual color and look that I wanted to go for. Out of all the different paint brands that I have used over the years flipping furniture, I found that this cabinet coat acrylic enamel paint has got to be the best paint that I have ever used. It definitely saves you a lot of time because you don't have to use a top coat because it dries super hard and super durable. And there are other options out there such as Dixie Bell and Melange, but for the price, you don't really get a lot of paint for the money, and this stuff definitely is the best bang for your buck. So I would definitely recommend this stuff. They are not affiliated with me in any way. I just really like their paint, and it is great. Like I said earlier, I wanted to give it a nice finished look top and bottom. So this is the bottom of the table, and I'm giving that about 2 coats of paint. It doesn't really need any more than that because it's not like anybody's gonna be crawling underneath the table and calling you out on how unfinished your piece looks. So I moved on to the base while that was drying so that I can finish off all of the stain. And like I said, it goes on nice and dark, but when you wipe it off, it's just a little light for what I wanted it to be. So like I said, later on, you'll see how I remedy that. So I didn't want to bore you with all the paint. I did do about 2 coats of paint on the top, and then I switched to a 220 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander with the speed turned a little bit down. And I wanted to sand it nice and smooth because this is going to get about 4 or 5 coats just so that it can be as smooth as possible. That was one of the worst problem areas where you can see when I sanded it and had a low spot, but since I did put about 2 really thick coats of paint on there, I was able to go over it with that 220 and get it really nice and smooth and get rid of all of those little pits and dips and rough spots so that I can give it about 2 to 3 more coats of paint, because this is a tabletop. It is going to get used, and I want to make sure that it holds up to all the abuse. Because I didn't like how light the wood was coming out, I decided to switch over to one of my favorite new products that I discovered. It is BEHR's Poly and Stain Mix. It is all water-based, so it's easy to clean up, very, very easy to use. You just layer it up as many times as you want until you find the color that you like. And for this, I think I did about 3 coats, and I got this really nice, vibrant cherry color, and I absolutely loved it. I originally was going to go for more of a walnut color, but once I applied that, I really liked it, and I just applied all of my coats until I was happy with it. Now that everything's pretty much complete, it is time for me to put all of the legs back onto the base. Now I have to say, this thing is using more bolts and screws than I have ever seen on any other piece that I've worked on. It has about 5 bolts for every leg, not to mention 2 more later on that are going to go from the bottom up into the actual top. Makes it 7 per corner, which is absolutely ridiculous to me. I couldn't imagine it needing that many, but at least I know it's solid and it's gonna stay nice and put together. So that color combination I am super happy with. I have to say, I couldn't imagine it coming out like this when I seen it on the side of the road. So let's go ahead and take a look at some final photos of this table. I have to say, it's looking pretty good from a table that was discarded and laying next to a tree to now being super complete and ready for somebody to use. So at the end of every video, I like to go over the numbers on this one, and obviously everybody knows from the beginning of the video, I got it for free. All of the material I already had in my stock, but I'll go ahead and throw in about $30 on material, and I currently have it listed for about $500. I haven't sold it yet, but I haven't really been trying super hard to get rid of it because I may end up just using it because it was free. So we'll see if it sells, and I'll give you an update in my next video if it does. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and I can't wait to see you on my next project.